My sister thought she had gotten away with it, moving our father to a depressing facility and stealing his life savings. But as I held his frail hand, he gave me the key to her downfall. A secret document that would unravel everything she had done. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the gentle, powdered scent of a well-kept elder care home. It was the sharp, aggressive odor of industrial bleach failing to mask a deeper, lingering scent of despair. It clung to the back of my throat, a chemical harbinger of the heartbreak to come. The place was called Golden Meadows, a name so cynically cheerful it felt like a slap in the face. The walls were a pale, sickly yellow, scuffed with the black marks of passing carts and wheelchairs. The only sound was the distant, monotonous drone of a television, and the soft, rhythmic squeak of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes on the linoleum floor. My sister Vanessa had described it on the phone as a practical choice and a cozy, no-fuss place where Dad can be safe. Her voice, smooth and reassuring as always, had painted a picture of simple comfort. "He's happy there, Amelia," she'd said, her tone laced with just enough manufactured sincerity to quell the unease fluttering in my stomach 3 states away. "Honestly, he's settled in beautifully." That lie, so casually delivered, unraveled the moment I stepped through the door. The woman at the front desk, her face a mask of bored indifference, barely looked up from her magazine as she pointed me down a long, dim corridor. "Robert's in room 2B, end of the hall on the left." Each step I took felt heavier than the last, my carry-on bag bumping against my leg like a dead weight. The doors to the rooms I passed were mostly open, offering sad little vignettes of lives winding down in sterile, impersonal boxes. In one room, a woman stared at a blank television screen. In another, a man slept with his mouth open, a thin blanket pulled up to his chin. There was no warmth, no chatter, no sense of community. It felt less like a home, and more like a waiting room for the inevitable. Room 2B was no different. The door was slightly ajar, and I pushed it open gently. The room was small, barely large enough for the narrow bed, a rickety-looking nightstand, and a single, hard-backed chair. A small window looked out onto a brick wall, allowing only a sliver of gray afternoon light to filter in. And there, in the bed, was my father. A strangled sob caught in my chest. This wasn't the man I remembered, the vibrant history professor with a booming laugh who could hold a lecture hall captive with stories of ancient civilizations. The man in the bed was a shrunken, faded version of him, his skin pale and thin, his once sharp blue eyes clouded with a weary confusion. He was propped up against a flat pillow, wearing a thin, gray gown that hung loosely on his diminished frame. A half-empty glass of water sat on the nightstand, just out of his reach. He didn't notice me at first. His gaze was fixed on the water-stained ceiling, his expression vacant. My heart fractured. I was an archivist. My life's work was to preserve history, to care for precious, fragile things. And here was the most precious person in my life, neglected and warehoused like a forgotten document in a derelict archive. "Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. His head turned slowly, and for a moment his eyes remained unfocused. Then a flicker of recognition. A weak, trembling smile touched his lips. "Amelia," he breathed, his voice a dry, papery rustle. "My girl, you came." I rushed to his side, dropping my bag and taking his hand. It felt impossibly fragile in mine, all bone and thin skin. "Of course I came, Dad. I'm so sorry it took me so long." I pulled the chair closer, my eyes scanning the room, taking in the peeling paint on the window sill, the faint, unpleasant odor that the bleach couldn't hide. Rage, cold and sharp, began to cut through my shock. "Vanessa said, she said you were comfortable here," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. His smile vanished. A shadow passed over his face, a look of profound sadness that twisted the knife in my gut. He shook his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. "Vanessa," he murmured, and the way he said her name, a mix of disappointment and resignation, told me everything I needed to know. "She makes choices." I reached for the glass of water and held the straw to his lips. He drank greedily, his eyes closing for a moment. When he was done, I set it down and gently brushed a stray piece of white hair from his forehead. How could this have happened? How could my own sister, who grew up in the same loving home, who was doted on by this wonderful man, have done this to him? Dee lost our mother a decade ago, and for years it had been the three of us, a small but tight-knit family. Or so I had thought. Vanessa, the polished real estate agent with the perfect life, had assured me that selling the family home was the only way to afford Dad's long-term care. "It's a top-of-the-line facility, Amy," she had insisted. "Private room, excellent staff, gardens. Dad deserves the best." It had made sense at the time. I trusted her. I was the older sister, the practical one, but Vanessa was the one on the ground, the one handling everything. I sent money every month, believing it was supplementing a comfortable existence. Looking around this bleak, depressing room, I felt a fool's shame curdle with my anger. The gardens, the private room, the excellent staff, it was all a fantasy she had constructed. Where had the money from the house gone? The house our father had built his life in, the house where he and our mother had raised us. The truth was stark and unavoidable. Vanessa had sold his past, his security, his dignity, and for what? This. I held his hand tighter, trying to pour all my love and regret into the simple touch. He looked at me, his eyes clearing for a moment, and I saw a spark of the sharp, intelligent man he had always been. "She thought she was so clever," he whispered, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. The words hung in the air, filled with a weight I didn't yet understand. All I knew was that the scene in front of me, the neglect, the cheapness, the utter lack of care, was a profound betrayal. It was an act of cruelty so deep it felt bottomless. I looked from my father's weary face to the grim little room that was now his entire world, and a cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. This was not just a mistake or a poor choice. This was a theft of a life. The betrayal was worse than any diagnosis, crueler than any illness. In the hours that followed, my shock slowly hardened into a protective shell of purpose. I couldn't fall apart, not here, not in front of him. My father deserved a warrior, not a weeping daughter. I started by making the small room feel a little less like a cell. I unpacked the soft wool blanket I'd brought from home and draped it over his thin institutional one. I placed a framed photo of him and my late mother on the nightstand, their smiling faces a beacon of warmth in the cold room. I helped him drink more water, tidied the small space, and spoke to him in a low, soothing voice about my work, my cat, the blooming hydrangeas in my garden, anything to replace the oppressive silence. He drifted in and out of lucidity. At times, he would stare at me blankly, lost in the fog of his condition. But then his eyes would clear, and he would be there, my father, present and sharp, trapped inside a body that was failing him. During one of those clear moments, I asked him gently, "Dad, why did you let her do this? Why didn't you call me?" His brow furrowed with effort. "She took my phone," he said, his voice raspy. "Told the staff I get confused, that I make things up. She said you were busy, that you agreed with all of this." He squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly firm. I knew that wasn't my Amelia, not my girl. The calculated cruelty of it stole my breath. Vanessa hadn't just neglected him. She had actively isolated him, cutting off his connection to the outside world to ensure her narrative went unchallenged. She had painted me as a co-conspirator in his abandonment. That evening, after ensuring he was as comfortable as he could be, I stepped out into the hallway to make the call I was dreading. My hands were shaking as I dialed Vanessa's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and breezy. "Amy, hey, I was just about to call you. How was the trip? Did you find the place okay?" she chirped, as if we were discussing a weekend getaway. "I found it, Vanessa," I said, my voice dangerously low. I walked further down the hall, away from my father's room, not wanting him to hear the anger I could no longer contain. "I'm here now, at Golden Meadows." I let the name hang in the air, heavy with accusation. There was a slight pause. "Oh great, how's Dad? Is he happy to see you?" "Happy to see me?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts to control it. He's in a tiny, dark room that smells like bleach and sadness. He's dehydrated and alone. What is this place, Vanessa? What have you done? Her tone instantly shifted from cheerful to defensive. A wall of ice slammed down between us. Okay, calm down, Amelia. You're overreacting. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean and it's safe. It's what we could afford after setting up his care fund. Care fund? I scoffed, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. You told me you sold the house for nearly $400,000. You told me he was in a facility with gardens and activities. This is a warehouse for the elderly, and you know it. Where is the money? Vanessa. The money is in a high-yield trust where it's being managed for his long-term needs, she snapped, her voice sharp and practiced. It's complicated financial stuff, you wouldn't understand. I have it all under control. You fly in for one day and suddenly you're an expert. The condescension, the blatant gaslighting, it was a masterclass in manipulation. She was treating me like a hysterical, interfering child. I understand that our father is being neglected. I understand that you lied to me about every single detail. I did what I had to do, she said, her voice turning cold and final. Dad's needs are met. He's safe. That's all that matters. I have to go. I have a client meeting. We can talk more when you've had a chance to calm down and see things clearly. And then she hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, trembling with a fury so profound it made me feel dizzy. You wouldn't understand. The words echoed in my head. She had always been like this, casting herself as the savvy, sophisticated one and me as the quiet, bookish older sister who was out of her depth in the real world. She had used that persona to commit the ultimate betrayal. I returned to my father's room, my face a carefully constructed mask of calm. He was awake, his eyes watching the door, as if he'd been waiting for me. He must have heard the anger in my voice. I sat down beside him and took his hand again. That was Vanessa, I said quietly. She's difficult. He nodded slowly, his gaze holding mine. His eyes were startlingly clear. He squeezed my fingers once, twice, a deliberate, rhythmic pressure. He leaned closer, and I had to lower my head to hear his faint, urgent whisper. Don't fight her on her terms, Amelia, he breathed, his voice barely audible but charged with intensity. She thinks she has all the pieces, but they've forgotten one crucial thing. His words sent a shiver down my spine. It was the way he said it, not as a confused old man, but as a strategist, a chess player revealing a hidden move. He held my gaze for a long moment, a silent message passing between us, a shared understanding that ran deeper than words. It was a plea, a warning, and a promise, all at once. Then, as quickly as it came, the clarity faded and his eyes clouded over again. He sagged back against the pillow, exhausted by the effort. I sat with him until he fell into a shallow, restless sleep. The rage still burned inside me, but now it was accompanied by something else, a sliver of hope, a burning question. They've forgotten one crucial thing. The phrase became a mantra in my mind, a key to a lock I hadn't even known existed. Vanessa thought she had one, that she had everything under control. But my father, even in his frail state, had just armed me with the one thing she could never account for, a secret. And I would not rest until I discovered what it was. Growing up, Vanessa had always been the sun, and I, the quiet planet in her orbit. She was charming, vivacious, and possessed an uncanny ability to get whatever she wanted. While I was the responsible one, the one with perfect grades and a meticulously organized bedroom, Vanessa was the one who could flash a dazzling smile and talk her way out of any trouble. Our parents, especially our father, were utterly captivated by her. He called her his little sparkler. I was his steady girl, a compliment that, even as a child, felt solid but undeniably less exciting. My devotion to our father was born of quiet afternoons in his study, surrounded by the smell of old books and pipe tobacco. He taught me to love history, to see the stories hidden in objects and documents. He showed me how the past was a living thing, something to be protected and revered. That shared passion forged a bond between us that was deep and unspoken. Vanessa, on the other hand, had little patience for the past. She was relentlessly focused on the future, specifically her future, which always seemed to require a new car, a designer handbag, or a lavish vacation. The financial requests started in her early 20s. There was the loan for a down payment on a condo she couldn't afford, the emergency funds for unexpected credit card debt, the investment in a get-rich-quick scheme that inevitably failed. Dad always gave in. "She's just finding her feet, Amelia," he'd say with a sigh, signing another check. "She has so much potential." I'd warned him, gently at first, then with more urgency, that he was enabling her. He would just smile sadly and say, "She's your sister. We have to take care of family." After our mother passed away, Vanessa's sense of entitlement seemed to crystallize. She began to see our father's assets not as his life savings, but as her future inheritance, one she seemed increasingly impatient to receive. She got her real estate license, and her life became a performance of success. She drove a luxury SUV, wore clothes that cost more than my monthly rent, and posted endlessly on social media about her fabulous listings and five-star client dinners. I now saw it all with horrifying clarity. It was a carefully curated illusion, a house of cards built on a foundation of debt and propped up by our father's generosity. The last time I had seen her in person, about a year ago, she had made a pointed comment that now echoed ominously in my mind. We were at the family home, helping Dad sort through some of Mom's old things. Vanessa picked up a silver picture frame, her painted nails tapping impatiently against the glass. "You know," she'd said, with a casual air that didn't quite mask the greed in her eyes, "this house is worth a fortune now. All this equity just sitting here. It's practically irresponsible." At the time, I had dismissed it as typical Vanessa talk, all about assets and equity. I never imagined it was a declaration of intent. I never dreamed she would be so predatory, so vulture-like, as to circle our father's life while he was still living it. My work as an archivist was the antithesis of Vanessa's world. I dealt in facts, in primary sources, in the careful, methodical preservation of truth. My professional life was a quiet rebellion against the superficiality she embodied. I found satisfaction in order, in details, in ensuring that stories were told accurately and honestly. This training, I realized, was perhaps the only thing that could equip me to fight her. She operated in a world of smooth sales pitches and emotional manipulation. I operated in a world of evidence. The contrast between us had never felt so stark. While I had been carefully cataloging historical records and living a modest, stable life, she had been methodically planning the plunder of our fathers. The story she had told me, of his gentle decline, of their mutual decision to sell the house, of the wonderful new home she'd found for him, was the most audacious fiction she had ever constructed. I thought about the sacrifices our father had made for us. He'd worked 2 jobs for years to pay for our college educations, never taking a real vacation for himself. He funneled his spare money into the house, lovingly maintaining the garden Mom had planted, refinishing the hardwood floors by hand, building bookshelves in his study that reached the ceiling. That house wasn't just an asset, it was a testament to his love and his life's work. Vanessa had liquidated it as easily as if it were a stock, turning a lifetime of memories into a number in a bank account, her bank account. Her polished appearance, her vague but impressive-sounding career, her constant talk of investments and portfolios, it was all a smokescreen. She wasn't a savvy businesswoman, she was a common thief, one who was devious enough to steal from her own ailing father. The coldness of the act was staggering. To not only take his money, but to dump him in a place like Golden Meadows demonstrated a level of cruelty I couldn't fathom. It was a calculated decision to give him the absolute minimum level of care, to maximize her own profit. Sitting there in the dim light of that miserable room, watching my father's chest rise and fall with each shallow breath, my grief was eclipsed by a cold, hard fury. Vanessa had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She had mistaken my trust for foolishness. She saw our father not as a person, but as an obstacle between her and his money. She had forgotten who I was, and more importantly, she had forgotten who he was. He wasn't just a sick old man, he was our father, a man of intellect and foresight. And he had left me a clue. They've forgotten one crucial thing. That phrase was my North Star. My fight for my father wouldn't be one with emotional pleas or angry accusations. It would be one with facts, with evidence, with the undeniable truth. I would become the archivist of my sister's crimes. The next morning, I left the facility with a singular, driving purpose. The anger that had been a raging fire was now banked into hot, focused coals. My father's whispered words, "She doesn't know everything," my good neighbor, played on a loop in my mind. He had been lucid. He had been intentional. It wasn't a rambling comment, it was a directive. I bypassed my rental car and called a taxi. I didn't want Vanessa, who I was certain was tracking my movements in some way, to see my car parked on the familiar street of our childhood. The ride to the old neighborhood was a journey through a landscape of memories. Every corner, every tree, every house held a story. When the taxi pulled up to the curb, I saw it, our house, or what was left of it. A large, sold sign from Vanessa's real estate agency was staked into the lawn, a garish, triumphant monument to her betrayal. The windows were dark and empty. The rose bushes Mom had so carefully tended were overgrown with weeds. A wave of grief washed over me, so intense it almost buckled my knees. This was the scene of the crime. Steeling myself, I turned and walked next or to the small, immaculately kept brick house where Mrs. Gable had lived for as long as I could remember. She had been my mother's best friend and a constant, comforting presence in our lives. Her garden was, as always, a riot of color, a stark contrast to the neglect next door. I rang the doorbell, and a moment later, the door opened. Mrs. Gable, a small, bird-like woman with bright, intelligent eyes, peered at me through the screen. Her face broke into a warm, genuine smile of recognition, which was quickly replaced by a look of deep concern. "Amelia, my dear girl, what a surprise. Come in, come in." She ushered me into her cozy living room, which smelled of lemon polish and freshly baked cookies. After settling me on her floral sofa with a cup of hot tea, she sat across from me, her expression serious. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been worried sick about your father. That sister of yours, well, she's a piece of work, isn't she?" The validation in her words was a profound relief. "You have no idea, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "She put him in a terrible place. And the house." Mrs. Gable's eyes flashed with anger. "I saw it all. The moment your father had that spell, she swooped in, cleared the place out in a weekend. It was cold, Amelia, clinical. When I asked her where Robert was going, she was so vague. 'A wonderful place upstate,' she said. I knew right then something was wrong. Your father would never want to leave his home." My heart ached for this kind woman who had been forced to watch it all unfold, helpless to intervene. "He told me to come to you," I said, leaning forward. "Just last night. He said you might have something for me." Her eyes widened, and a look of understanding dawned on her face. "Oh, that dear, clever man," she breathed. "I was beginning to wonder when you'd come. He made me promise not to say a word unless you asked me directly. He was so afraid she would find it." She stood up and bustled over to an old wooden secretary desk in the corner. She unlocked a small drawer with a tiny, ornate key and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. My name, Amelia Carter, was written across the front in my father's familiar, elegant script. She handed it to me, her hands trembling slightly. "He came over one afternoon, about a month before he got really sick. He was worried, Amelia. He said Vanessa was asking too many questions about his finances. He said he needed to build a firewall, as he put it. He had just come from his lawyer's office." My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. It felt heavy, freighted with significance. This was it. This was the crucial thing. I tore open the seal, my heart pounding against my ribs. Inside was a sheaf of crisp legal documents. On top was a letter, handwritten by my father. "My dearest Amelia," it began. "If you are reading this, it means my fears have come to pass, and Vanessa has acted on her worst impulses. I am so sorry, my steady girl, that this burden has fallen to you. Inside this envelope, you will find a legally executed and notarized durable power of attorney, naming you as my sole agent in all matters, financial and medical. It was signed and witnessed on March 15th of this year. It explicitly revokes any and all previous documents, including the one Vanessa has been using. She does not know it exists. I had to stop and take a deep, shuddering breath. He had known. He had seen this coming and had prepared for it. He had laid a trap for her, and she had walked right into it. The letter continued, outlining his wishes for his care and explaining that he had entrusted this to Mrs. Gable because he knew Vanessa would tear the house apart looking for it if she suspected its existence. He ended the letter with a line that brought fresh tears to my eyes. "Use this to protect what is left of our family. Be strong. You have my full faith. Love, Dad." Beneath the letter was the document itself, official and undeniable, with the raised seal of a notary public and the signatures of his lawyer and another witness. Every decision Vanessa had made since March 15th, moving him, accessing his accounts, selling his house, had been done illegally. She wasn't just immoral, she was a criminal. A wave of fierce, empowering clarity washed over me. I was no longer just a heartbroken daughter. I was my father's legally appointed agent, armed with the one weapon that could defeat Vanessa. The truth, codified in law. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," I said, looking up at her, my eyes filled with a new, unshakable resolve. "Thank you for everything. You have no idea what this means." "I think I do, dear," she said, patting my hand. "Now you go give her what she deserves." I left her house feeling like a different person. The passive victim had been replaced by an active strategist. The investigation was no longer a vague idea, it was a concrete plan. My first step W. As no longer a mystery. I pulled out my phone, my hand steady now, and looked up the number for the best elder care law firm in the city. Vanessa thought she was playing a game of Monopoly, collecting properties and cash. She was about to find out we were playing chess, and her king was already in check. Armed with the new power of attorney, I felt a surge of power I hadn't realized I'd lost. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my father's voice, his foresight, his trust in me. It was the shield and the sword I needed. The next morning, I walked into the offices of a law firm specializing in elder law and financial abuse. I was assigned to a sharp, compassionate attorney named Sarah Jenkins, a woman whose calm demeanor barely concealed a core of steel. I laid out the entire story for her. Vanessa's lies, the state of the facility, the sold house, and finally, the hidden document. As I spoke, Sarah listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished and slid the manila envelope across her polished mahogany desk, she picked it up and examined the POA with a practiced eye. After a few moments of silent reading, she looked up at me, a grim but reassuring smile on her face. "This is perfect, Amelia," she said. "Ironclad, your father did a very smart thing. Every action your sister has taken since March 15th has been fraudulent." The legal confirmation sent a wave of relief through me. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "Do we confront her, call the police?" "We will, but not with a frontal assault," Sarah advised. "People like your sister build walls of denial and aggression. If we go in guns blazing, she'll just lawyer up and stall, all while trying to hide the money. Our first move needs to be strategic. We need to knock her off balance, let her know that we know, but without revealing the full extent of our hand." Her plan was simple and brilliant. Instead of an angry, accusatory call from me, Sarah would initiate contact. But I insisted on making the first call myself. I needed to hear her voice to deliver the initial blow. Sarah agreed, coaching me on exactly what to say and what not to say. The goal was to rattle her, to make her reveal her own guilt through her reaction. That afternoon, I sat in Sarah's conference room, the phone on speaker. I took a deep, centering breath and dialed Vanessa's number. She answered with her usual professional clip. "Vanessa Carter." "Vanessa, it's Amelia." "Oh," she said, her voice instantly cooling. "I was hoping you'd have calmed down by now. I'm very busy, Amelia. Is this important?" "I think so," I said, my voice as steady and even as I could make it. I looked at Sarah, who gave me an encouraging nod. I'm calling because I have a question about Dad's legal affairs. I'm looking at a power of attorney document he signed back in March. It names me as his sole agent. Can you explain why you've been making major financial decisions without my legal authority? A silence. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint hiss of the open line. I could almost picture her on the other end, her perfect smile frozen on her face, her mind racing. The breezy confidence was gone, replaced by a sudden, stark silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was a strangled whisper. What are you talking about? A durable power of attorney, I repeated calmly, as if discussing the weather. Signed by Dad on March 15th, notarized and witnessed. It revokes all prior documents. I have it right here in front of me. The dam of her composure burst. That's impossible, she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. That's a fake, you forged it. Dad wasn't competent to sign anything in March. He's a sick old man, you're taking advantage of him. Her accusations were wild and desperate, the flailing of someone caught in a lie. Sarah scribbled a note and pushed it in front of me. She's admitting he was incompetent while also claiming she was acting on his behalf. Keep her talking. It's interesting you say he wasn't competent, Vanessa, I said, my voice still level. Because you sold his house in May, presumably with his consent under the old POA. So which is it? Was he competent then, but not in March? Or have you been making decisions for an incompetent man without proper authority? You don't know what you're talking about, she sputtered. I have a valid POA. I have been managing his affairs perfectly. I will sue you for this. For slander, for forgery. The threats were empty, pathetic. She was cornered, and her only defense was to lash out. There's no need for threats, Vanessa, I said, delivering the final, prepared line. I've retained legal counsel. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. She'll be in touch with you shortly to schedule a time to review the financials of Dad's estate. I expect your full cooperation. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a string of furious, incoherent words, but I didn't wait to hear the rest. I calmly pressed the end call button. I looked at Sarah, my heart hammering in my chest. Well, I breathed, that went about as expected. Sarah smiled, a genuine, triumphant smile this time. That went perfectly. Her panic was an admission of guilt. She threatened to sue you for forgery, which is what guilty people do when they have no legitimate defense. She just confirmed our entire case. The first major confrontation was over, and it hadn't been a screaming match. It had been a quiet, precise, strategic strike. I hadn't revealed where I got the document or that I knew about the money. I had simply presented a single, irrefutable fact and watched her unravel. I felt a grim satisfaction. I had shattered her perception of the situation. For months, she had been the one in control, the one holding all the cards. She believed I was hundreds of miles away, ignorant and easily misled. Now she knew I was here, that I was fighting back, and that I had a weapon she never, ever saw coming. The game had changed, and she knew it. Her desperate attempts to regain control were about to begin, but it was already too late. I had the law, the truth, and our father's last clever move on my side. Vanessa's panic manifested exactly as Sarah had predicted, with a clumsy, desperate attempt to regain control. The very next morning, I received a frantic call from the administrator at Golden Meadows. Ms. Carter, this is Joan from the front desk. Your sister, Vanessa, is here. She's demanding to have your father discharged into her care. She's causing quite a scene. My blood ran cold, but Sarah had prepared me for this. Do not, under any circumstances, release my father to her, I said, my voice firm. I am his legal power of attorney. I have already faxed the document to your office. My sister has no authority. If she refuses to leave, please call the police. Understood, the administrator said, sounding relieved to have clear instructions. I hung up and immediately called Sarah, who sprang into action. Within the hour, Vanessa was served with a temporary restraining order, legally barring her from coming within 500 feet of my father or his residence. The order was a necessary shield, protecting him from her chaotic desperation. It was also a clear signal that we were not backing down. With my father safe, our investigation into Vanessa's finances began in earnest. Sarah's firm employed a forensic accountant, a quiet man named David, who moved through spreadsheets and bank records with the methodical precision of a surgeon. What he uncovered was even uglier than I had imagined. The sale of the house had closed for $395,000. The full amount had been deposited into a new account opened solely in Vanessa's name. There was no trust. There was no care fund. It was just a personal checking account. And from that account, the money bled out at an astonishing rate. David laid out the statements on the conference room table. There was a $45,000 withdrawal to pay off a mountain of high-interest credit card debt. There was a wire transfer for $60,000 to a luxury car dealership. There were charges for thousands of dollars at designer boutiques, five-star hotels, and extravagant restaurants. She had taken a trip to Italy just 2 weeks after dumping our father at Golden Meadows. The most damning discovery was a series of checks written to her own real estate brokerage. She had paid herself a double commission on the sale of the house, a move that was not only unethical, but, given that she wasn't the legal agent, blatantly fraudulent. She was drowning in debt, David concluded, pointing to a summary sheet. Her income as a real estate agent was highly unstable. She was living far beyond her means, projecting an image of success while her financial life was collapsing. Your father's house wasn't just a windfall for her, it was a lifeline. Seeing it all in black and white, the cold, hard numbers detailing her greed and deceit was sickening. She hadn't just stolen his money to be rich, she had stolen it to bail herself out of a mess entirely of her own making. She had sacrificed his comfort, his health, and his dignity to pay for her shopping sprees and poor financial choices. During this time, I focused my energy on my father. The restraining order meant Vanessa couldn't interfere, and with the new POA, I had the authority to make immediate changes. I spent 2 days visiting every reputable long-term care facility in the area. I finally found the perfect one, a bright, cheerful place called The Willows with sunny rooms, beautiful gardens, and a kind, attentive staff. It was expensive, but it was exactly what my father deserved. The day I moved him was emotional. He was lucid when the medical transport arrived at Golden Meadows. He looked around the depressing room one last time, then looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You did it, Amelia," he whispered as the pair hummed. Ikes gently settled him onto the gurney. "My steady girl." His new room at the Willows was like a different world. It was filled with light, overlooking a courtyard filled with roses and bird feeders. I unpacked his belongings, arranging his books on a new shelf and placing the photo of him and Mom on his nightstand. For the first time in months, I saw him truly relax. He fell asleep that afternoon not with the tense exhaustion of before, but with a peaceful, contented expression on his face. My final piece of evidence came from him. A few days after the move, as he sat in a comfortable armchair by the window, he spoke to me with a clarity that was both a blessing and a curse, for it meant he remembered everything. "She kept telling me the papers were just a formality," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "That selling the house was my idea. She would put the phone on speaker and pretend to be talking to you, saying how you agreed with everything. I knew it wasn't you, but I was so tired, Amelia, so tired. It was easier to just let it happen." His confession was heartbreaking, but it was also the final nail in Vanessa's coffin. She hadn't just stolen from a vulnerable man. She had actively manipulated and emotionally abused him, using my name and my love for him as a weapon. Sarah reviewed the complete file. The fraudulent POA, the damning bank records, the restraining order, and now, my father's own testimony. "We have everything we need," she announced, her voice grim. "We're going to file a civil suit to recover every penny. We are also handing this entire file over to the district attorney's office. This is a clear case of financial elder abuse. She won't be able to lie her way out of this." The stage was set. It was time for the final confrontation, not in a screaming match, but in the cold, unforgiving light of the law. Sarah's strategy for the final showdown was a masterstroke of legal maneuvering. Instead of immediately going to court, she proposed a formal mediation session. It was framed as a final opportunity to resolve the family dispute over Robert Carter's estate amicably. Vanessa, likely on the advice of her increasingly nervous-looking lawyer, agreed to attend. She probably saw it as a chance to bully me, to assert her dominance one last time, and to perhaps negotiate a settlement where she could keep a portion of her ill-gotten gains. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. The mediation took place in a sterile conference room at a neutral law office. A large, polished table separated the two sides. I sat with Sarah, a thick binder of evidence resting neatly in front of me. Across the table, Vanessa sat with her lawyer, a slick-looking man named Mr. Klein. Vanessa had dressed for battle in a sharp power suit, her face a mask of defiant indignation. But I could see the tension in the tight set of her jaw and the way she nervously tapped her pen on her legal pad. A retired judge, acting as the mediator, began the proceedings with a calm, procedural overview. He then turned to Sarah and invited her to make an opening statement. Sarah stood up, her presence calm and commanding. "Thank you, Judge. We are here today because a grave injustice has occurred. Over the past several months, Ms. Vanessa Carter has engaged in a systematic and fraudulent scheme to liquidate the assets of her ailing father, Mr. Robert Carter, for her own personal enrichment." Mr. Klein immediately interjected. "Objection! My client was acting in her father's best interest under a valid power of attorney." Sarah simply smiled. A document which was superseded on March 15th by a new, notarized power of attorney naming my client, Amelia Carter, as the sole agent. A document Vanessa was legally served a copy of 2 weeks ago. She placed a copy on the table, sliding it toward the mediator. Every action Ms. Carter took after that date was illegal. Vanessa's face paled slightly, but she held her ground, whispering furiously to her lawyer. Sarah continued, her voice never rising, her tone purely factual. Using this invalid authority, Vanessa Carter sold her father's home for $395,000. She then deposited the entirety of those funds into a personal account, not a trust or an estate account as she claimed. Sarah opened our binder and began, page by page, to detail the financial devastation. On May 28th, a wire transfer of $60,000 to a luxury car dealership. On June 3rd, a payment of $45,000 to 3 separate credit card companies. In July, charges totaling over $15,000 for a trip to Italy, including stays at several 5-star hotels. With each new piece of evidence Sarah presented, a bank statement, a credit card bill, a receipt, I could see Vanessa shrink. The color drained from her face. Her lawyer was frantically scribbling notes, his initial confidence evaporating. "Furthermore," Sarah went on, her voice hardening slightly, "Vanessa Carter placed her father in a substandard, state-funded facility, Golden Meadows, while falsely reporting to her sister that he was in a high-end private home. The monthly cost of Golden Meadows is approximately $2,000. She was spending 10 times that amount on her own lifestyle. This is a family matter." Vanessa suddenly burst out, her voice cracking. "My father and I had an understanding. He wanted me to have that money." "Did he also want you to pay yourself a fraudulent double commission on the sale of his home?" Sarah countered, sliding the brokerage statements across the table. "Did he want you to leave him dehydrated and isolated in a room with a view of a brick wall while you posted photos of yourself drinking champagne on the Amalfi Coast?" The room fell silent. Vanessa stared at the documents, her mask of defiance completely shattered. She looked small and exposed, a common criminal caught in the act. Mr. Klein cleared his throat, shuffling his papers. My client may have made some bookkeeping errors. She fully intended to use the remainder of the funds for her father's care." "There is no remainder," Sarah said flatly. "After her spending and paying off her debts, less than $100,000 is left. That is not a bookkeeping error. That is theft. And financial elder abuse is a felony in this state. That was the word that broke her. Felony. Vanessa looked up, her eyes wide with panic, finally understanding the depth of the trouble she was in. She looked at me, a silent, desperate plea in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sisterly compassion. I just looked back at her, my expression unreadable, letting her see the consequences of her actions reflected in my calm resolve. Sarah delivered the final, decisive blow. We have already prepared a civil complaint for the full recovery of the $395,000 plus damages. However, before we file, we wanted to make one thing clear. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. We have also prepared a complete file of this evidence. The fraudulent documents, the financial records, your father's testimony, which we are ready to deliver to the district attorney's office this afternoon. Unless, of course, your client wishes to avoid a criminal investigation. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Mr. Klein slumped in his chair. He knew they had no defense. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Vanessa put her head in her hands, and for the first time she began to sob, not tears of remorse, but tears of self-pity, the pathetic whimpers of a thief who had been caught. The showdown was over. There had been no screaming, no dramatic accusations from my side, just the cold, methodical, and public presentation of the truth. My father wasn't there, but his foresight, his love, and his quiet strength had won the day. Vanessa's carefully constructed world of lies had been systematically and utterly dismantled. The aftermath of the mediation was swift and decisive. Faced with the undeniable threat of criminal charges, Vanessa crumbled completely. Through her lawyer, she agreed to all of our terms. She signed over the remaining funds from her account and took out a massive loan against her own condo to repay the rest. Within a month, the full $395,000, plus legal fees, was transferred into a secure trust account that I now managed for my father's care. Vanessa's downfall was not just financial, it was absolute. The civil settlement included a clause that she would have no contact with our father and forfeit any claim to his estate. Stripped of her stolen wealth, she was forced to sell her luxury SUV and her condo, moving into a small, rented apartment on the other side of town. The professional consequences were just as severe. News of the elder abuse investigation, though it never resulted in charges due to the settlement, leaked within her professional community. Her real estate license was suspended, and her career, built on a foundation of perceived success and trust, was left in ruins. She became a pariah. I felt a quiet sense of vindication, but not joy. Watching my sister's life implode was a deeply sorrowful thing, a tragic final chapter to a sibling relationship that had been fractured for years. Her greed had cost her everything, not just the money, but her family, her career, and her reputation. My focus remained entirely on my father. With his finances secure, I was able to ensure he received the absolute best care at the Willows. His health stabilized, and while his physical condition didn't dramatically improve, his spirit did. The light returned to his eyes. He spent his days in a sunny room, reading books from the facility's library, attending classical music concerts, and watching the birds in the garden. Our visits were peaceful. We rarely spoke of Vanessa. There was no need. The wound was too deep, and dwelling on it would only bring pain. Instead, we talked about the past, about happy memories of my mother, of family vacations, of the life he had built. I brought my laptop, and we used my archivist skills to digitize old family photos, preserving our real history, the one Vanessa had tried to erase. One afternoon, about 6 months after the mediation, my father was having a particularly lucid day. We were sitting by the window, watching the autumn leaves fall. He turned to me, his expression serious, and took my hand. "I want you to forgive her," he said, his voice soft but firm. I was stunned. "Dad, after everything she did to you, to us." "Not for her, Amelia," he explained, his blue eyes holding mine. "For you, anger is a heavy thing to carry. You saved me. You brought me peace. Now you need to find your own. Let her go." I knew he was right. My anger had been a fuel, a necessary fire that had propelled me to action. But now the fight was over. Holding on to that rage would only poison my own peace. In that moment, looking at my father, safe and content, I felt the last vestiges of that burning fury finally begin to cool, replaced by a profound, if melancholic, sense of peace. I had fulfilled my promise. I had protected him. I never saw Vanessa again, though I heard through the grapevine that she had moved away, seeking anonymity in another state. The story of what she did would always be a part of our family's history, a dark and painful chapter. But it wasn't the final chapter.